Hello, I'm Pastor Nanette Christofferson, and along with Pastor Steve Talmage and our intern pastor Kevin Anderson, we offer these short Bible studies on our lectionary readings. We are at the end of our lectionary year, Year B, and we'll begin a new year, Year C, with the beginning of Advent next week on December 1st. So we end this year with Christ the King Sunday, and our Old Testament reading comes from Daniel chapter 7, 9 through 10, 13 through 14. So let's start with a little bit of background. When we think about the book of Daniel, I always think about the first 6 chapters because I find those to be the most inviting and the most exciting. We have so many great stories of Daniel and how he handled captivity after being captured by the Babylonians. So the book of Daniel takes place around 587 BC. And this is a time when Israel has been captured by the Babylonian Empire, and they are in really total ruins. The temple has been dismantled. The people have been captured. Not everyone was taken to Babylon, but many, many were. And it is believed that many of the young people were taken there. And in Jeremiah, it tells us that these people are to make Babylon their home for many years to come. And so it's so interesting as the book of Daniel unfolds, for we have some of our Bible stories, our most famous Bible stories of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and the fiery furnace were tossed, right? And they were tossed in that furnace because they refused to obey the king, or really to look at the king as God. And we have this miracle that they came out of the fiery furnace okay. And the same thing happens again to Daniel. The same type of thing happens to Daniel when he's put in the lion's den, and it's a different king this time, but Babylonia still has control over this land, and Daniel again um, has is protected by God all night. So it's so fascinating that so many great stories at these beginning chapters 1 through 6 come, but then the next chapters are a lot of vision chapters. They're what a revelation chapter. And so as we look to chapters 7 through 12, we see that it depicts both the hardship that has been experienced by those who will live after Daniel and the actions of the rulers who reigned with the Babylonians. So the final scenes shift to Palestine. The violence escalates and rulers directly assault the people of God. Each vision ends with the affirmation that God will prevail. Evil will not have the last word. So the dominant tone in the book is one of encouragement rather than chastisement. The book does not have a sinner, take heed tone. The examples of faithful courage in the first part of the book serve to encourage the reader who may have to live in the midst of dark times envisioned in the latter part of the book. So, what is apocalyptic literature? Many of us have our own idea of what apocalyptic looks like, and we often think of end times, but that's more eschatology. If we go back to the Greek word of apocalypse, it means the unveiling of secrets. So it's a revelation. And so when we look to these last 5 chapters of Daniel, we see that it's an unveiling, that Daniel has been given this revelation by God through visions. And it's a way of offering hope to people. And I think sometimes when we look to apocalyptic literature, we think of just fear-based, right? But really, if we investigate a little further, we see how through these revelations that Daniel is given hope, and we too are to take encouragement and hope from this as well. So in early Jewish and Christian literature, an apocalypse is a revelation of hidden things given by God to a chosen saint, or the written account of that revelation. These revelations often come in visions or dreams and are intended to provide hope and encouragement. So, if these texts are intended to encourage and offer hope, what is hope? So, let's go at just a few things of what hope is. And these come from a book I had in seminary called Unmasking uh, Apocalyptic Literature. And so, taking the Greek word of unmasking from unveiling. So, we're unmasking some of the things that we thought might be, and we come to the hope. That's part of the center of apocalyptic literature, is the hope that is offered. So, here are some aspects of hope that we might not always think of. Hope is the heart and center of the healthy human being. We wake up with hope. Hope is a theological virtue of the will infused by God. Hope begins with knowledge of a future good that is hard to obtain but possible. Hope buoys belief in God, for faith nourishes and sustains it. Hope is a positive response to a negative darkness. Hope is being surprised by God. Hope cares tenderly for a devastated earth, not allowing its contamination. When we talk about faith, hope, and love, we often hear that in 1 Corinthians 13, and faith and hope are intertwined together along with a threefold cord of love. And it's this beautiful passage in Corinthians 13. But hope is a part of it, and it's a root of all that we are, right? It is through the hope of the resurrection. It is through what God has brought to us in our faith. And it is this deep seed of hope, of enduring through all. So let's look at Daniel 7, 9 through 10, and 13 through 14. In this first slide here, it's just Daniel 7, 9 through 10. Now remember, this is a vision that Daniel has had. As I watched, thrones were set in place, and an ancient one took his throne. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and flowed out from his presence. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood attending him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. As I watched the night in visions, I saw one like a human being coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. So let's take a look at Daniel's vision of judgment. What's going on here? So in Daniel 7 through 12, it portrays the downfall of the Seleucid Empire and judgment of Antiochus in a series of vision accounts. Daniel 7 is the most arresting and dramatic of these. In it, the divine court is set up, probably on earth rather than in heaven, and judgment is passed on the four beast empires. The fourth empire, and specifically Antiochus, is judged and destroyed with fire. On Christ the King Sunday, our attention is focused on this judgment scene. We see the Ancient One seated on a central throne with the myriad of servants attending him. Physical descriptions of God are few in the Hebrew Bible, presumably in keeping with the Torah's prohibition of representing God with mundane images. If we turn to the beasts, we can look at the beasts and their earthly sovereigns. By contrast, are mere beasts that devour and break in pieces for a limited time. But the divine fire may devour them in the end. Antiochus is judged, not only for its violence and oppression against God's people, but also for his arrogance. Punishment of the arrogance of the kings is a theme in the first half of the book of Daniel, especially in chapters 4 and 5. Following the judgment of the four empires and destruction of Antiochus, Daniel sees one like a human being, literally, son of a human, coming with the clouds of heaven. Christians, following the Gospels, quite naturally interpret this figure as Christ the King, the Messiah who comes on clouds of heaven to rule the earth forever. Indeed, Jesus frequently refers to himself as Son of Man, and in his trial he quotes Daniel 7, 13 to 14, causing the high priest to tear his clothes and declare blasphemy. But we have to look to the original audience of which this book was intended. Of course, the author had another in mind, possibly an unnamed messianic figure, or the angel Michael, who is Israel's defender, or even God's people collectively. In Daniel 7, 18, 22, 25, and 27, the kingdom is given not to an individual, but to the holy ones of the Most High. In contrast to the beasts who violently assert their power, the one like a human being is presented before God and given dominion and glory and kingship. He rules by God's appointment, not by his own self-assertion and violence. Christians, will naturally assume the author foretells God's appointment of Jesus as the everlasting Messiah. Perhaps we need not choose between original intention and later application. One can hold that the author establishes a prophetic paradigm that has one fulfillment in the author's time and another, later, an ultimate one in Jesus. So who else could this man on the cloud be, right? We look at it from a Christological viewpoint as Christians, but let's look at some other possibilities as well, especially for the audience of that day and time. The identity of this proposed Savior has been open to speculation, from the coming Messiah, the angel Michael, the angel Gabriel, the high priest Onias III, Judas Maccabeus, the collective Jewish people, and of course, for Christian believers, Jesus the Christ, as is evident in Mark 13:26, where the gospel writer portrays Jesus in terms of Daniel's vision. However, to simply read this text through a Christological lens would not do justice to the powerful significance this imagery would have had for an audience who was severely threatened by empires. This is good news. The main point to be made in this text is that God is sovereign over history. Rulers come and go. They rage and destroy and boast arrogantly, even declaring themselves God manifest. But in the end, the books will be opened and the truth told. Boasting will come to an end, and all will acknowledge God's sovereignty. The one like a human being, God's chosen, will then rule forever, served and honored by all people. The oppression of the arrogance of rulers has its day, but in the end, God's Messiah will rule on earth. And what a beautiful scene, as every knee shall bow. To him alone are the power and the glory, and he alone deserves our ultimate allegiance. So just a few questions for you to ruminate on this week. How have apocalyptic readings helped you in your faith? Have they? Maybe they haven't. Maybe they've been readings that just scare you to death and you just want to erase them, right? If you could take them out of the Bible, you might do that. But when you learn that it's an unveiling and it's a vision that's been given to someone to offer encouragement and hope, then that kind of changes things. And you can kind of help drop the beast, especially in Daniel. You can really see how the visions are showing how these empires will come and go, but God over all is ruler. And what a breath of fresh air and hope that brings to all of us. What other book in the Bible does Daniel remind you of, and why? Probably reminds you of the book of Revelation, right? Where John is given this revelation from God. And we hear kind of some of the same languages, especially as we read all the way through 7 through 12. How do you define hope? And where how do you define hope? And where do you place your hope? I think how each of us defines hope, when we can define it, then we will see where we place our hope or who we place our hope in. Far too often, I believe we place our hope in people, in government, in things that will come and go and will crumble. And yet our hope for us as Christians, as followers of Christ, is in Jesus Christ. Well, I hope that you have a great week and have an opportunity to dig into the Word and maybe read the whole book of Daniel. It's a delightful book and it helps remind you of some of the stories from childhood, but it also helps you see the power of God as well. May you have a blessed week.